The larger legacy left by Governor Deval Patrick will be debated for years to come, but one accomplishment is undeniably historic, becoming the first black governor of Massachusetts. But in tonight's Focus Report, we look at whether that milestone has opened the door for other candidates of color. When Deval Patrick was first elected governor in 2006, he knew he was making history.
I am descended from people once forbidden their most basic and fundamental freedoms.
Patrick's friend, Barack Obama, had yet to win the presidency. But already people were wondering if the door was finally open to more politicians of color.
There's more of us now, and there's more people running, and there's more people paying attention to what's going on in government.
Boston City Councilor Tito Jackson credits Deval Patrick for giving him the inspiration to run.
You can take a skinny black kid from Roxbury and really allow him to dream enough to be able to be a city councilor in a neighborhood that he grew up in. That's a good legacy.
But Tito Jackson may be the exception. Up on Beacon Hill, only 6 legislators are black, the same number as in 2006. And this November, no candidates of color will appear on the statewide ballot. But, says former Boston mayoral candidate Charlotte Golar-Ritchie, Patrick's footprint extends well beyond elective office.
Having Roderick Ireland as the Chief Justice and then appointing Geraldine Hines, the first black woman to serve on the SJC, the head of the MBTA, the head of the Registry of Motor Vehicles. There are a lot of people on that list.
A list that now includes Golar-Ritchie and her 2 fellow commissioners on the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. She says diversity in state government will have an effect long after she and others leave office.
They will have had experience. They will have made connections. They will have built constituencies of their own that will enable them to go on and do wonderful things on behalf of their communities.
But Golar-Ritchie says in an ironic twist, black candidates may now have a harder time winning election because white candidates now actively court minority voters.
There was a time when I lived in Dorchester where you wouldn't see many elected officials coming out to Dorchester. I'm talking about the white elected officials, right? And that has really changed. And I think it has changed because people understand that people of color are going to exercise their right to vote.
Case in point, Dorchester resident Takia Gorman, who voted for the first time 8 years ago when Patrick first ran. And even though he won't be on the ballot this time, she says she'll be returning to the polls.
You don't really know until it's affecting you, and then it's like, oh, you want to be involved or you want to be, you want to have a voice.
But college student Shatara Way doesn't think having someone of color in office has really made a difference.
I still feel like even with a black governor, I don't feel like that's helped anything. I still feel like there's people who feel there's no point in voting.
That's a sentiment Tito Jackson says he hopes to change by paving the way for the next generation.
I'm not going to do this forever. Is really all of us thinking about a legacy, what we want to leave behind, and also how many folks are we bringing in the door? How many people are we encouraging to run? How many people are we helping to run?
So has Deval Patrick's governorship given a lift to candidates of color or helped us move past skin color in politics? Here to discuss that are Paul Watanabe. He's a professor at UMass Boston who studies the politics of ethnic groups. And Marcela Garcia is an op-ed columnist at the Boston Globe and former correspondent with Telemundo. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Now, there's 2 things at issue here. It's the inspiration to vote. We saw that, of course, with both Governor Deval Patrick and the first time, anyway, that Barack Obama ran. And the second issue is, relating to someone like yourself and thinking, I could do that. But is it the job of somebody in one of these offices to try to inspire people, or is being there inspiration enough?
Well, there's no question on the first point that you made that there's nothing that brings out a minority vote than having minority candidates on the ballot. And we saw that with the Obama election. We saw that when Deval Patrick ran twice. But that same poll, if it only is able to come out for minority candidates, it does not have the sustainability that is going to be necessary to have an impact. Because, of course, while Deval Patrick is the first, I remember something almost 55 years ago when John Kennedy was elected and was the first Catholic, the elected president. Well, of course, he's the last one, too. The real test is going to be whether Deval Patrick has someone who will replace him as the second elected statewide official.
I think what he did, Deval Patrick, which was also a very clever move politically, is that he gave access to a lot of minorities. He instituted this ethnic media roundtable, for example, in which he opened the doors to the State House. Again, it was politically self-serving, but these were Brazilian radio stations, Haitian media outlets, Cape Verdean, who's probably, it was the first time they have ever been invited to the State House. And that, I think, in turn breeds engagement, breeds civic involvement, and then, it creates this multiplier effect, I think, that does get reflected in the polls. But then again, that's progress, but it's not. We're not there because,
although certainly the progress, as we pointed out in the pieces, that white politicians did not used to go into, but they were dismissive for a couple reasons. They figured they're not going to vote for me, or they're not going to vote, and just kind of left them out. They thought, well, they'll go down ballot to some write-in candidate or something like that. Nobody takes that for granted anymore. So there has been an inspiration for more people to vote.
There's been an inspiration, at least the realization strategically, that you cannot ignore this growing population in the United States. In 20 years, this is going to be a majority-minority country, and that's the direction in which things are moving. But there's also inspiration in terms of candidates. The Tito Jackson comments, if those sorts of things in terms of the next generation, and I look at something that I've never seen in Massachusetts politics before, and that is a fairly long bench in terms of having minority candidates who might step up and run statewide. You see that in the mayoral list, Seti Warren, for example, Lisa Wong, for example. In the state senate, Sonia Chang Diaz, Linda Dorsina-Forey. In the Boston City Council, Ayanna Pressley, Michelle Wu. These are the possibilities now that didn't exist just a few years ago.
And by the way, you mentioned Michelle Wu. She was groomed by Elizabeth Warren, and from the Elizabeth Warren campaign also came another minority candidate, Lawrence Mayor Dan Rivera, who worked in her campaign. So there's this notion, and to your point earlier about how white candidates are not ignoring all these communities, I think it was Deval Patrick that showed them that this is how you win. You go to the grassroots, and that's where the grassroots is, minorities in all these communities of color.
One thing about Deval Patrick, and I don't see if you agree, Paul, he didn't pander to one community over another. I mean, and it was criticized to some extent, like, you're not doing enough for this community, you're not doing enough for our people, you're not doing enough to stop crime, that kind of thing. But he just he always said, I'm the governor of all the people. That's
the formula of success in a state, and it's the same kind of criticism, of course, at the national level Barack Obama has received. But I think that Deval Patrick's formula is a formula for victory. But the problem that may be is he came from the outside, and one of the impediments to candidates like Deval Patrick is we really have a system that's really closed within Massachusetts, particularly in the Democratic Party, frankly. And the question is whether you're going to have to come in from the outside like Deval Patrick is to make historic changes.
That's a good point.
Yeah, well, in the Democratic Party, there's already this fabric being created, at least in the Latino community. The Democratic Party instituted last year the Latino caucus, for example. And I don't doubt that a lot of these people that are involved, all these Latino activists, were energized or attracted to the party via Deval Patrick. I totally, I would bet that that's the case. But if you go outside the Democratic Party, there are not networks of people that would, energize or inspire people to run.
We shall see who he energizes next. Maybe some group or other. Paul, Watanabe, pleasure to have you, and as always,
Thank you.
Garcia. Thank you so much.